guys. Hi, curious people.
Hi, curious people.
It's weird. You know, I haven't been on YouTube for like the longest time.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be back. And interestingly, something came up in our conversation.
I realized that this was, time for application because I'm actually one of the interviewers for Stanford for undergrad this year. So I was signing up for that and I was doing the training and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, the deadlines are like, the interviews will happen in November for early action or early decision. And then application ends in January for the regular. And the interviews happen right after that. And I'm sure people are quite stressed. They're like in the middle of like finalizing their applications and all that. You remember doing that?
Yeah.
Fun times.
Nerve-wracking.
Yeah. At the same time, I feel like we have been really blessed because we have a lot of interesting experience. Like I applied to mostly schools in the US and you applied to schools in both, but also in the UK.
Yeah.
And then we've been blessed with kind of like good results. And I think along the way, we're kind of the type of people who like just kind of absorb a lot of things as we go. And I feel like in our brain, we have a lot of thoughts that we've always wanted to share, right, to people. And we think we can be helpful at the end of the day. And yeah, I mean, especially for people who are applying internationally.
They're like unique challenges.
Yeah, it's a unique challenge, and we've gone through a lot of those unique challenges maybe, and we can have an interesting perspective, hopefully, a helpful perspective. So yeah, that's kind of what we're doing here.
Yeah, so we thought we would just share some of our thoughts, share some of our top tips.
Yeah, so this video is going to be all about our each individual top tips.
Yeah.
And we haven't really discussed. Your top tips will be different from my top tips, probably.
They're different. Yeah,
I mean, some will be very similar and we'll add, but some will be a little bit different.
And maybe to give them a little bit of context, Jesse is an American citizen and he applied to only US schools. I'm an international, I'm Indonesian. I mean, just in case we have like international viewers or whatever.
Fair.
And I applied to schools both in the US and the UK. And we will should we just put in logos of schools maybe that we, that we applied to and we got into? So yeah, I'll let you start because this was kind of Jesse's idea.
Okay, my top tip number one, as we think about the application, I think the first thing I would say is people talk a lot about passion and how it's very important to kind of demonstrate a strength in something. I think that is valuable. The way that I think about what a like ideally perfect application looks like is kind of like a T structure. And I don't know if this is a framework that you've heard before, but the top part of the T is breadth, right? Have you demonstrated kind of intellectual curiosity and vitality across many different subjects? And are you kind of good across many different things? That's something that, of course, universities will value a lot, right? Like they need to know that you're kind of good at a lot of different things and you've tried a lot of different things. And then there's the vertical portion, which is okay, but within a certain topic, can you also demonstrate that you can go really deep? It's just more like, have you identified that you are interested in something and has that interest turned into kind of other activities and things that you've done? Now we can talk about what those things might be.
I like that a lot.
Can you demonstrate both breadth and depth? And I think that as you think about an overall application, it would be important to have that. If you only have one, I do think that having breadth is great. You're not going to be penalized for not having passion necessarily, but if you can demonstrate that, then I think you can really stand out as an applicant.
That's solid.
Yeah, so that's
a really good one.
That's tip number one for me.
Gosh, where do I start? I'm gonna go with a tip that I think fits in nicely with the one you just put out, which is that, I would encourage you to think of all the different pieces of your application, whether it's your personal statement, your resume, or whether it's all your stats, all the different boxes you're like filling in
your recommendations.
Your recommendations and all that as pieces of kind of like a beautiful big puzzle of who you are and how you want to present yourself. You want to make sure that all the dimensions of who you are, the person that you want to show up sufficiently. And let's say, your stats show that you're very strong academically, but you also have a reflective side. You also have an artistic side that you also want to show off. See it as, different ways of showing up, and you can talk about your artistic endeavors. I mean, this is kind of what I did. Basically, I'm kind of projecting, but you can talk about all the other stuff in your essay. You can emphasize it a little more in some of the other questions, as opposed to, just talking about academics all the time. You can maybe show up as maybe a little too academic. Is that fair?
Yeah. applicants.
Yeah, you could, you know,
you
and
certainly
maybe
could.
that's not like an accurate portrayal.
I think it's
kind of like the holistic you that you want to show.
I think it's a very common pitfall.
Yeah.
People to seem too one-dimensional in one way.
Right.
And the most common way to seem one-dimensional is academic.
Right.
Because
like
as a student, that's
stats,
your,
and then your essay, you talk all about,
and then your
academic
recommendations like,
achievements.
oh, this is a great student, this is the smartest kid I had, and then
Right.
you suddenly become a very
Yeah.
one-dimensional application.
Yeah.
Right? The way that I always think about it is, imagine you're the admissions officer,
Right.
Like how many thousands of applications are you reading in a very short period of time? So just put yourself in those shoes, right? And you imagine you're this person, right? And you have to read all these applications, and they're all applications like yours. Like they're smart kids who have this kind of grade and this kind of, and you're reading through all these stats and whatever. And at the end of the day, is it clear that this person is a human? Like, is this like a person that I understand and like, I feel I want this person to join my community, my college, right? And sometimes I think that we get maybe too wrapped up in like, oh, I'm a very academically or just a very accomplished person in general,
Right.
which is great, and you want to show all those accomplishments. The AdCom is seeing thousands of these. And
you don't want to lose the human side, the human element.
Are you sure you're actually portraying a completed puzzle, to use your phrase, right? Or actually shows a beautiful painting of something cohesive instead of just collections of, this is a nice piece of puzzle, this is a nice piece.
Right. Yeah.
My second tip, I want to talk a little bit more about the passion. I think the passion, to be clear, that depth that you're trying to demonstrate, it can be simple, right? So for example, I just heard of a friend who, as a high schooler, was into weightlifting. A lot of applicants have that interest, and of course they'll think well, yeah, I like working out, maybe I'm on a sports team, whatever, I like working out, but so what would I write about?
Right.
Well, this person chose to basically turn his passion for bodybuilding and weightlifting into this whole thing. I've volunteered at medical centers because I'm interested in sports medicine, and eventually I want that to be my major. I want to focus on that, and I want to become like a surgeon who can help repair sports medicine type stuff, right? So now this person turned something that they did and they were actually genuinely interested in, and they kind of crafted a story into something that is actually meaningfully different and is kind of unique to them, right? Only they can share that story. But then actually makes sense as an AdCom saying, oh wow, this person's really interested in health and sports. This person wants to make an impact in sports medicine, wants to become a surgeon, blah, blah, right? And has volunteered here, he's done this thing, he's read these papers, whatever. And sometimes that's all it takes.
And I think as an admissions officer, when I see something like that, I think the story communicates more than just that he's interested in weightlifting and then therefore sports medicine and all that, but it also shows a lot of the traits that maybe you're looking for in a candidate, like someone with a lot of self-discipline. If you're into weightlifting and you take it that far, then you're someone who's self-disciplined, and then there are other stories that maybe show oh wow, this kid is really self-aware. And so, anyway, just think about how these other things outside of your academic achievement can kind of show and tell a story about your personality and your traits that are positive.
And I think your forward-leaning traits too, right?
Right.
Not just I'm interested and I read a book, but more and then what? And then so are you going to demonstrate something?
Right.
Do you have a bias to action?
Exactly.
It's not, this kind of depth doesn't have to be this very intimidating, I have to have written these crazy academic papers, or I have to be number one in the world in my math competition or whatever. It could be taking something that you're interested in, demonstrating some more action and just self-reflection, and then actually trying to make some kind of impact, right? That's a little bit unique maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so my next step feels like stepping back a little bit, but generally it's super important, and I'm sure you guys have all done this at this point, but to just really, really do the work in, researching and looking into all the different schools. The reason I say this is I applied to both UK and US schools, and they have very different approaches in terms of even just the applications themselves. They also have different schools of thought in terms of what they're looking for in a candidate. I think they have slightly different leanings. The UK leans a little bit more academic, I would say. Like Jesse was talking about the T. I feel like for the UK, the vertical line in the T is much longer.
The depth.
The depth relative to the US, maybe so.
And it's very academically focused.
Very academically
The T,
focused.
to be clear, doesn't have to be academic. It could be sports, it could be music, it could be anything.
It could be anything.
But in the UK, it's a little bit more geared towards the academic.
Yes, you're right. I also noticed that even within schools, they tend to also, they just have little things here and there that are a little bit different. And I really approached each of my application as like their own standalone thing. I tried not to do like a one size fits all approach where I just prepared, one personal statement for all my schools. By the way, you have to do that for the UK because you apply through UCAS, and I think you have one big essay. But for the US, I think there's a tendency to want to write just one essay, but like the prompts are all different.
Right.
And the reason they're different is they're maybe looking for slightly different things,
Right.
And so just make sure to put the same amount of effort and seriousness into every application, approach it in a very customized way. And so that's important because, again, as an admissions officer, you'll kind of feel the energy that like, oh, this person's really writing this answer for this question that we put out. That it's not like something you copy and pasted from like a different application.
Right, for sure. Okay, so because we know that this is kind of maybe like peak personal statement preparation time,
Stressful times.
So I think we should have one from each of us, 2 tips, specifically for the personal statement. Yeah? And I'm gonna invite you to give your top tip first.
Okay, so this is kind of like a personal belief of mine, but I'm sure a lot of people have inspired me along the way. But I believe that stories are really powerful. Stories can connect and can really show the other person like your human side that we're talking about. That's also important to show in your application. And so for your personal statement, I would lead with a story. I used to basically shortlist my favorite stories about my life that I think are both interesting.
Are we gonna hear any of them at some point?
Maybe. That are both like interesting and also unique to me. Oh, but also like relevant,
of course.
Right? What I did was that I basically drafted different essays using kind of different stories, and in each one I would have the story flow into another series of things that I definitely want to include in my personal statement, because obviously you want to talk about your achievements, but you don't want that to like just overpower the essay, but you also want your story. So that's what I did, and I think that was really helpful, and I ended up picking a story that sat really nicely with the rest of my application, going back to that puzzle thing. And I think maybe it might sound like a lot of work. I will say it was probably a lot of work doing all the different drafts and kind of like prototyping and experimenting with like, oh, how does this story fit in with this? How does this story fit in with this one?
It's part of the exploration.
It's part of the exploration. So that was my approach. I was somewhat formulaic. I also really enjoy maybe writing, and that's why I ended up taking the formulaic approach, because I was like, I want to get the energy of each of these essays and judge for myself, which one I think represents me the most, feels most authentic, blah blah blah. So that's my tip. I think like lead with stories and then like prototype and experiment via drafting, basically.
Nice. I did something similar, but I don't know if I experimented quite as much as you. I had like maybe 1 or 2 stories, but I did something similar.
Have you had less interesting stories?
I obviously had less interesting stories. Not many people can have as any interesting stories as you. Okay, so my tip, I'm gonna try to build on that. And I think this is a common mistake that I see. I've read quite a few essays, actually. Undergrad and not undergrad, for graduate school and whatever. I've read quite a few from helping a lot of different people. Yeah. I think the most common mistake that I see is the essay becomes overcomplicated. So I would say my tip is don't overcomplicate. And like Maudy was talking about, I think that there's a good reason why. I mean, you have all these different stories that you've prototyped, and so it's kind of lingering in your head, perhaps.
Yeah.
Or, there's so many things that you want to say because you've accomplished so much, or because you have this kind of personality that you want to show off, or whatever it is. And it's great that you have so many things, but this is not the time to dump, right? It's not a time to write as long of an essay as possible and then condense it. Oh, and that's going to be the strategy. No. And everyone that I talk to, nobody has an issue with, oh, my essay's too short. Everyone's issue is, oh, my essay's too long and I have to squeeze it. But in that squeezing process, make sure that you're not losing sight of things like clarity of the message that you're trying to say. The genuineness, right? Like your voice, your actual personality coming out.
Yeah.
The effort into the singular point that you're trying to make, as opposed to trying to hit like 10 points loosely.
Yeah.
That's not how you make someone like you, understand you, relate with you. That's not what it is. So really try, I know it's hard, but really prioritize and try not to get too caught up in squeezing everything in, and really think hard about what is those small handful of points that you're trying to make, and then make those points really well, clearly.
Make sure that it's not like a written resume. Make sure that your essay is not just a longer version.
Right. I think this is also, the personal statement is also one of the only times that you can really show your personality genuinely. This is the time when you're actually speaking to the reader.
Right.
So don't be afraid to also show some personality. Like a lot of the times I see writing that's very stiff, as if they're writing an essay for IB exam. It doesn't have to be like that. And like, you cannot tell that personality if it's not like a nice, concise, crisp,
I like that.
clear, not overcomplicated essay. So that's kind of what I would say.
The 2 tips are very complimentary, because I'm like, lead with stories, but then don't go crazy.
Right, but don't try to squeeze in all 10 of your life stories.
Right.
Something crazy like that.
That's good. That's a good one. I'm proud of you. Cool. So that's that. I mean, I hope that was helpful. We actually are also thinking to go a step further in terms of helping you guys and maybe doing something that's a little bit more direct.
Yeah, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna open up this link below and we're gonna read your personal statements. If you give us a little bit of information about who you are, and if you can submit your personal statement and you're applying specifically for US or UK schools, which is kind of, the context in which we've been talking about and where we feel like we're particularly helpful.
And undergrad, right?
And undergrad, then we will read your personal statement. I think unfortunately we might not be able to get to every single one, depending on how many people submit.
Yeah.
But the people who do get your essays read, it will be read by either me or Maudy or both, and we will provide actionable thoughts and feedback as that kind of impartial person who understands the context of what you're going through, understands kind of the AdComp context, and we think that we can be very helpful. We also know that it's kind of like a time when maybe some of you guys are in the process of still formulating the story. Maybe some of you guys are almost complete, and so you just are doing fine-tune. So we want to take all that context into consideration in terms of how we can be most helpful. But yeah, ultimately, if you drop your information in your personal statement in the link below, we will actually be reading it and providing that, hopefully those helpful thoughts and feedback for you. So hopefully that's something that you will be looking forward to.
I'm looking forward to it. I love this stuff.
Yeah, I do too. And I mean, I really want people to like do well, Like if they have a resource that, we think that we're a somewhat helpful resource. And I just want to see people like benefit from
the insights and stuff we've learned.
And all the people we've talked to over the years.
And we're also thinking of maybe doing a couple of other videos. And so look out for those as well.
But this was fun though.
Yeah,
and hopefully it's
really
helpful
fun.
for you guys.
All right. Bye.
Bye.